I want to welcome a very, very special person who promotes extremely important ideas in Israel and beyond. Here's my pleasure to introduce Amiad Cohen, who is the Director General of Keren Tikva, known in America as Tikvah Foundation, and here it is Keren Tikva. So Amiad, first of all, shalom to you.
Shalom, shalom. Hi.
Such a pleasure welcoming you, and I want to reveal a secret that I visited you at your office, and I really was so inspired that I asked you if you can share some of the work that you do, and even maybe more importantly, who you are and why you do what you do.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you for coming to the office and spending such a lot of time here in our offices.
Thank you. So, a few words about yourself. I understand that you're a rabbi and Israeli officer, served in the army. I think the background will be very important for us.
So I'm not a rabbi, but yes, I was in the IDF after finishing high school. I went to the IDF for 4 years, served in a very interesting service in IDF, being in combat through the Second Intifada and the Second Lebanon War. After 4 years as an officer in Golani, I studied in yeshiva for 4 years. That's my not rabbinical, but Jewish studies background. And since then, I'm learning a lot of, let's say, great ideas, the classic ideas of the Western world, and trying to put both of them together. That's what I do here in Tikvah Israel. In the meantime, between then and today, I got married and I have 6 kids, 5 girls and a boy. I started a couple of businesses. I used to run a town in Israel, involved in real estate, in the high-tech sector a little bit, and today involved in other businesses in the States too. And I have a security company that still runs, and I'm still a partner there. They're trying to have some influence in Israeli security and borders and army bases. Now in the past 5.5 years, 6 years almost, I'm involved in running the Tikvah Foundation, the Tikvah Fund in Israel. And the Tikvah Fund in Israel is trying to implement conservative ideas in the Israeli discourse, understanding that the state of Israel is started as a socialist state with a very, very strong communist perspective, influenced during the 60s and the 70s with the progressive ideas coming from the United States, and all the Israeli institutions influenced by the progressive and neo-Marxist ideas, with not having a real tradition of conservative ideas, despite the fact that the majority of Israelis are deeply conservative in every aspect. We are strong in family, strong in community, strong in religion, practice and beliefs and traditional ideas, very strong belief in responsibility and community. And there's a big gap between the public policy in Israel and the world of ideas to the real intuitions and tradition of the Israeli public.
You dedicate yourself to basically sharing ideas. Why it's important?
First of all, I learned that from trial and error. When you try to fix something and you think further why people are doing these things, so you understand that they conceive reality in some way, and you try to understand why they conceive reality in that way, and you go deeper and deeper, and you understand that ideas matter, and the free market of ideas and trying to explain your ideas and convince people with them can shift reality much. It takes more time, but it really changes your approach towards the world, and you don't need to change small parts of it, but it's a real change of the platform of how you think about the world. To be honest, the most important questions are the moral questions. My assumption is that everyone wants to do good. But the big debate that we have is what's the definition of good and how to implement that in reality. What's the best way? And if you debate between the progressives and the conservatives, no one is evil here. People just conceive human nature and the way to achieve good and prosperity in the world in a different way. Obviously, as a conservative, I'm sure I'm right, and the conservative ideas are right, but I understand that I don't hold the entire truth in my hands, and I'm trying to understand what I lack from the progressive ideas and I don't blame them for being evil. So explaining to the public the importance, A, the importance of ideas, B, to open and expand the world of ideas and to convince them that in my eyes, why the conservative way of thinking is better on the long term for human prosperity.
I also understand that you're involved in publishing books. In other words, your foundation introduces some American authors, British authors, to the Israeli public that otherwise would not be known.
First of all, to understand the book world, the book market in Israel, so the best example to explain that is to understand that Adam Smith has not been translated to Hebrew in full length till today. There's plenty of classic thinkers and more current thinkers that haven't been accessed to the Israeli audience. Now, the Israeli audience, despite the common knowledge, barely read English. So to enable these ideas to the Israeli public, they have to be in Hebrew. On the other side, the Israeli book publishing houses come from the intellectual elite or educated in the Israeli universities that don't even understand what is a conservative idea and don't know and have no recognition of conservative thinkers. So the idea, again, going back to ideas matter, and the best way to express and explain an idea is through books and magazines. So 20 years ago when I was young, even close to 30 years ago, when I was younger than I was today, there was Tikvah Fund, the Tikvah Fund of these days used to be called Shalem, and they translated the classic books like Leo Strauss, like Friedrich Hayek, and other thinkers like Alexis de Tocqueville, and obviously Edmund Burke. And when I was in my 20s, I read all these books during my time in the army and the yeshiva, and even a little bit earlier, and I was exposed to the conservative way of thinking. Now, the public today, to translate Tocqueville to current affairs today is a little bit more complicated. So here in Tikva, while I'm managing this place, we decided to publish more current books. For instance, Jordan Peterson, we translated to Hebrew, Douglas Murray, Charles Murray, Thomas Sowell, and other very important intellectuals that articulate, A, the importance of ideas and how they manifest themselves in more current challenges that the postmodern world needs to address, the post-national state world addresses. That's Douglas Murray's And Strange Death of Europe, the challenge of education, and the challenge of the environment. What are the real, or what are the options that we have in the world of ideas to approach these challenges? And the fact that the Israeli discourse is very, very narrow and one-sided gave us an opportunity to introduce these ideas to the young population here in Israel. I'm very happy to announce that we sold in a little bit more than 3 years, a little less than 150,000 books in a very small market of nonfiction books in Israel.
I just want to, from my side, say why I believe that Keren Tikva, and Tikva in Hebrew means hope, really provides hope for the future of the Jewish state. Because when I was in the Soviet Union and faced the KGB, or more so KGB was after me, I had a dream, and my dream was to come to the state of Israel, to immigrate, to make Aliyah, and really join the IDF and fight the enemy, so to speak, with weapons in my hands. And when I came, I attempted to go to the IDF, but at a certain point I said to myself that we live in the world where the bullets and missiles are important, but the ideas really would matter. In a way, I got involved in the Jewish education and continued to educate Russian Jews in the United States. So I feel it's like a real fight for the future, for the safety and security of Israel. And if to say, like briefly, what do you think are important values that the Israeli society can, let's say, improve, or how do you view the future of the Jewish state? What does it mean, Jewish state? What are the most important topic issues of the public discourse that need to be redefined?
It's a very important question, and thank you for that. What happened in the past 75 years, that the state of Israel was with an existential threat on a daily basis. When you're afraid of if you will survive, you don't have time to ask the real deep questions, and you give up your liberty and your way of thinking for the people who will fight the battle for your existence. So till the mid-'80s, the beginning of the '90s, we never asked constitutional questions, economic questions. We barely asked them, and the civil society questions. They don't have time and mental awareness for these things because we were in the middle of a war. Not always, but we were always in between battles and wars. In the past 20 years, after the Second Intifada and the Second Lebanon War, the Israeli public shifted towards understanding that the existential threat decreased. The Arab Spring, or as we call it here, the Arab Winter, the collapse of the Arab states around us gave us more time to think about our civil society. The fact that we don't have a Syrian army on the northern border, the fact that we have actually an ally on the southern one with the Egyptians, the Lebanese are collapsing, but Hezbollah is still there, but we can fight them. And I don't ignore the Iranian challenge, but an Israeli wakes up in the morning, he doesn't think about these challenges. And that's an opportunity to ask the first important question, why are we here? If the moral argument for a Jewish national state is anti-Semitism and the threat, the Auschwitz threat to be murdered in exile, so today, Israel mostly is a little bit more dangerous than other places. And if there's no existential threat, we need to understand why are we here. So it's an opportunity to ask the core questions of how we make decisions in a non-military society. Because in a military society, there's a centralized government that makes these decisions. But today, when a more liberated society, the question how we make decisions, it comes to the Knesset, it comes to the Supreme Court, it comes to a centralized economy. We still are used to the concept of a communist state that everything is centralized. Now is the time to ask these questions and offer an alternative. Yes, it definitely comes together to the question of what's the definition of a Jewish state. When everything is centralized, it can seem to people that the Jewish identity needs to be centralized too. But one of the lessons that Alexis Tocqueville teaches us, that there's a big difference between the society, the civil society, and the state. The state is a platform that is like a frame for something that is happening in the middle. But the question is, what is happening in the middle? And that's the responsibility of a civil society that is very, very young in Israel. We barely had one in the past 70 years. So the real challenge is, as I said, one, redefining the role of government in the state of Israel, how we make decisions as a public, and emphasizing and building a real thriving, interesting, strong civil society that they will debate. The civil society will need to answer these questions of what are we doing here, what does it mean to be a Jewish state, and what does it mean to be a Jew in modern days with a state and sovereignty on our own people.
Thank you. So how do you answer actually your big question? So in your view, what does it mean to be a Jew in modern society, which, Baruch Hashem, thank God, not like a military threat of existence to the state of Israel? In other words, in a peacetime. So what does it mean to be a Jew in a peacetime for you?
It's a very good question that we're now trying to drill down into it. It's very easy to say that I was in the IDF, that what makes me an Israeli Jew. But it doesn't work anymore. So first of all, the important part is being Jew as an individual in your life. And that can't be neglected. There's sometimes people who believe that the tension between the individual and the public, so if I outsource my Jewish identity to the public and to the state, I don't need to be Jew anymore. So the first thing is not giving up on the strong aspects of Judaism that we kept during exile. We have to have strong individual practices as a Jew, and a strong family and a strong community. Never give up, because what's happened in the state of Israel, we became not everyone, but a significant part of the Jewish people thought at the beginning that if we have a state, we don't need have the tradition anymore. So the first answer is coming back to that, to have individual life, individual spiritual life. The second question is obvious. The second part of it is obviously the public square, and that's hard to answer. It's an answer that I believe the best way to find out is to have competition between communities. I live in a place called Eli. When I wake up in the morning and open the window, I see the tabernacle in Shiloh. And I remember during COVID, we were davening outside, and I looked to the north, and I saw Nablus, I saw Shechem, and looking south, I saw Har Baal Chatzor, and it was Parashat Lech Lecha. And we were reading the parasha that Abraham came from Aram Naharaim to Shechem, Ad Elon Moreh, Ad Makom Shechem, and then he went south to Har Baal Chatzor, Ve'atek Misham Hara. And Abraham went actually in the valley underneath my house. And reading the Parashat Shavua outside, you can see where it happened. And there's a phrase there that says, Ko yeh zaracha. Our initial understanding is that we are here because of our ancestors. We're trying to obligate to their covenant with God. But I think the real understanding in my eyes is exactly the opposite. They went there because of us. Abraham went down in the valley between Shechem and Har Baal Chatzor, and he walked all around, believing that in the future there will be a big nation living by the moral standards of our ancestors. So the question is, how do we manifest our moral standards, a Jewish moral way of thinking that believes in responsibility, that believes in community, but believes in fighting for the truth as a nation, and having a very clear and strong and clean judicial system, and having a moral society that is still strong, believes in a moral covenant and a moral future. But these things are all abstracts, that this is a challenge of the next generation of the Jewish state. Building a very, very strong moral society, that the phrase liot or laguim is not something that we can dream about, it's something we need to do now.
Thank you. So people who really want to be part of this journey of Abraham and his children and his nation and move into the future as Or Leguim, the nation that is light upon the nations, people that share these moral values, what do you offer for either Israelis or Russian Israelis? What can they join in terms of your programs?
To be honest, the real challenge in the state of Israel today is the public policy sphere. It's very complicated to influence public policy in Israel today. What we're offering here is an alternative to change the public policy, and first of all, being educated and trained in alternatives to how we run the state today. I believe that if we shift the centralized government, if we liberate education in the state of Israel, the Americans who don't know, but we have a centralized education ministry, that from there they decide which book we're going to teach our kids in the entire country, and everything is centralized. And if we will liberate that, we will give people the opportunity to choose what they want, and from that they will thrive out the new definition of what it means to be a Jew in these modern times. So we're offering here seminars, A, to be introduced to the conservative ideas, B, to be introduced to the public policy ideas, what it means to be a conservative in the Israeli specific topics of public policy, from education to welfare. Welfare is very important because we believe in chesed, but we're outsourcing our chesed to the government here in Israel as a welfare state, and we want to change that. So we're combining the moral values, the moral arguments, the Jewish arguments, and how it implements into public policy. You can see that in the importance of the entrepreneur. we believe in the Hebrew phrase of entrepreneurship, Yetzirah and Yazamut. These phrases, it's out of taking responsibility. These words are very important in the Bible too, and in the Midrashim that try to articulate what the state of Israel means. We educated full year. It's called the Adam Smith program, not by accident. We have a Herzl program. We have Adam Smith program. Grant strategy, we have a different program for master degree students and retired generals from the IDF to understand the conservative approach toward international affairs. What's the moral argument for nationalism? What is the best way to achieve peace? And that's not not being afraid to use your weapons. There's a phrase in Yirmiyahu, Arur moneh harbo midam, may be cursed who's afraid to use his weapon, or I don't know the exact translation, but we should use the weapons because if we don't fight for the good, evil will take over. These moral arguments are not common in the postmodern discourse, and we're trying to educate these things. We obviously have a seminar for law school students that we're trying, again, to introduce the law schools in Israel that are totally 100% progressive with conservative ideas, the rule of law and not the rule of the judges, and not the rule of the legal advisors that is very strong here in Israel, separation of power, constitutional questions. So we educate the students from bachelor degree to master degree to even PhD students here in the Tikvah Fund. And from here, we try to help them articulate that in the magazine that we have called the Shiloach, and to introduce that to the Israeli public and offer a constructive alternative to how to run the Jewish state in these days.
For those of our listeners that are English speakers, is anything they can do, let's say from the United States? Can they read? Can they, take part of any of the programs?
So unfortunately today in English, it's a challenge. We try to build a Hebrew-speaking conservative movement. We understand today that we need to reach out to plenty of American English speakers or British or Australian that come here to Israel and want to be part of the conservative movement. And they are much more knowledgeable about the conservative ideas than the Israelis. We're now starting to do that too. We have a couple of series. Every Tuesday, there's now an introduction, a Zoom introduction to the Israeli conservative challenges on Zoom. You can see that in the Tikva website, the American Tikvah Fund website.
Imagine that someone would ask you a question that, some of us were faced, from time to time. I remember taking my age students to Europe. I remember we were in Greece and were kind of attacked by some, people like you, Jews, Israel's apartheid state and so on. What if someone would ask you, you live in Shomron, you live in Samaria, in a settlement, this is apartheid state.
I lived in South Africa in the 80s during the apartheid, and I believe I know what is apartheid. And here in Israel, there's no apartheid. That needs to be very clear and to everyone. There's no connection, no relation whatsoever with what's happening today in Judea and Samaria to what's happened in South Africa till the 90s. But now, the real question is, what is the moral argument for a Jewish state in the land of Israel? And what is the difference between occupying in 48 the state of Israel and the 67 war? So first of all, there was no Palestinian state ever. The first promise for a Jewish state in the land of Israel included the Jordan River and the eastern side of the Jordan River. The second argument is we need to separate between individual rights and national rights and national recognition. The United Nations, the entire family of nations, recognized the right of the people of Israel, the Jewish people, to have a national state, and did the Arabs get the recognition of a national state? The national state of the Arabs needs to be in Jordan. The Israeli national state needs to be on the western part of the Jordan River, between the Jordan River till the sea, from Kiryat Shmona up in the north till Eilat in the south. Unfortunately, in 48, we didn't accomplish the entire occupation of the land, but We finished that in 67. Now, that's the national recognition and the national right for a national state. Despite that, there's individual rights. An Arab who lives inside the state of Israel has 100% civil individual rights. The Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria have 95% of individual rights, that the 5% implicated for one reason: the fact that they want to harm, kill, murder, and hurt Jews in the state of Israel. If they didn't want to hurt, kill, and harm Jews, they would have 100% civil rights. I can prove that anywhere. And the fact that today the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria have their own local governments, they run their own towns, they collect their own taxes, they run their own driver license, they do everything they want, even more than Jews in the state of Israel and in Judea and Samaria. Now, is that a perfect situation? Definitely not. I believe that we can improve it. Do we need to improve it? Yes, but it depends on our partner from the other side. It depends on the Palestinians stop wanting to kill us. The second, recognizing that there is a national right for a national Jewish state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And the fact that if they want to achieve national recognition for the Palestinian people, they will need to find that in Jordan, that is an Arab state with a majority of Palestinians. 80% of the Palestinians of the Jordan kingdom are Palestinians, with 20% of Hashmis running the state. If you want to find national rights, go there. But I know Arabs, I live among them and with them, I drive the same road with them, I do a lot of business with them. People who don't want to kill Jews and not anti-Semites and anti-Zionists have a very good individual freedom and liberty, sometimes much more than Jews. The fact that I can't pray in Table Mountain, that's a lack of civil rights. And the Palestinians can do it. The fact that I don't have freedom of transportation in Arab cities because I'm threatened to be killed, and in fact, in a lot of experience of Jews that are being murdered and massacred inside the Palestinian cities, the fact that actually I have less civil rights and individual freedom and individual liberty than the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. Go to the Arabs inside the state of Israel and see the future. 50% of doctors in the state of Israel are Israeli Arabs. Today, this year, 50% of them are Arabs. That means they flourish. Their GDP is the highest in the entire Arab world. They will flourish under the Israeli Jewish state government. If they want to have their own state, they're offered to go and be part as a coalition. I don't need to move from Nablus or from Jenin or from Bethlehem. They can have a Jordanian passport, but with full individual rights in Jenin today.
But it seems like practically today, no Arab Israeli, not Arab Palestinian, leader is willing to recognize not just the entire territory as a Jewish state, but any territory as a Jewish state. No territory is a Jewish state. No Tel Aviv is a Jewish state. It seems to me, I'm talking about Palestinian positions. I'm not even sure about Israeli Arabs, actually, what is, the differences between some parties. So based on what you said, a perspective of some kind of a peaceful agreement or any prospect of peace, one state solution under the Israeli national government, or some kind of still two-state solution in the same territory?
We need to understand when we define the two-state solution, what's happening today in the international affairs, and you're totally right with that. They believe in a Palestinian state and a non-Jewish state that doesn't have any Jewish identity or recognition. When I speak, and when the conservative community in Israel speaks about the two-state solution, we believe in a Jewish state and aside of that, a Palestinian state, an Arab state. Now, the fact that there's no real leadership in the Palestinian Authority today that agrees with that, that's not my problem. I'm not obligated to what they think. we as a Jewish state are not responsible for their ideas. We're responsible for our ideas. And we need to be strong and fight for our sovereignty. If they want to live with peace, they will need to understand that there will always be a Jewish state next to them. Remember what Jabotinsky wrote in Kira Barzel, the Iron Wall. We don't need to be influenced by how the Arab thinks. It doesn't matter. We have to be strong and they will respect us. Afterwards, it's in their hands.
Most of my viewers live in the United States. They're young people and they really very concerned with the safety of Israel. What can they do individually?
So first of all, if you're real Zionist, I invite you first of all to join the IDF. As an officer in the IDF, I had a couple of Americans under my in my platoon that came for 2-3 years to join the IDF and help the Jewish people to fight against its enemies. That's, I think, the best option you can do. But we need to remember that national security is not only the soldier in the battlefield. National security reflects by a variety of things, from economic strength. It comes from the diplomatic situations. It comes from the journalism and the common knowledge in the public and how we express what we call today hasbara. These things are very important, and the battle of ideas, and we start this conversation with the importance of ideas. I think first important thing is to learn in depth the arguments. Having hasbara that the state of Israel doesn't have camels but have tall buildings like Manhattan is not the argument. The left is very good at understanding where the field of arguments needs to be in the moral question. And if we are weak, not able to articulate and to explain very clearly why there's a strong moral argument for the Jews living in the state of Israel, it doesn't matter what beautiful woman will stand in the video clip showing that we have a high-tech sector. The real help that the state of Israel needs, aside of strong soldiers and a strong economy, is people who articulate and understand and explain and express in every way possible the moral argument for the existing of the Jewish state that is not based only on the existential threat, but on the promising of what this state means for the Jewish people as the attempt to flourish the moral ideas of the Jewish people.
I want to thank you, Amiad, so much, and I understand that all of us, first of all, have to educate ourselves, be inspired, and inspire others. I want to wish you all the best, prosperity and success in fulfilling your mission. And Keren Tikva should be successful, because I believe it's hope for the state of Israel and its future. And shalom to the people of Israel.
Toda rabba, shalom, shalom. Thank you very much for everyone, for the listeners, and thank you, Rabbi Katzim, for having me here.